seem to be gesturing vaguely at a past that you're glorifying and that you characterize as the pinnacle of humanity, and criticizing modernity vaguely without actually pinpointing an actual systemic reason as to why modern society sucks feels fashy. What do you guys think? I've completely ignored chat this whole time. All right, so someone in chat said that Cinema Cartography, which is a channel I've watched in the past a little bit and that I liked, just posted a video that might be proto-fascist from what I was told. So we'll look into that latest video that might be proto-fascist. If you don't know Cinema Cartography, they have these videos. You might know these thumbnails, you might recognize them. I watched their whole thing on Andrei Tarkovsky. It was really good, if I remember correctly. They have something about art from time to time. Art is not content, sounds good. It's not bad, you know? It's aesthetics of evil. Sounds like a really interesting channel. So let's look into it. Illusion of progress.
Paris, 1961. Jacques Rivette sits down in a cafe with Jean Renoir. They plan to have a talk about the cinematic process. Renoir leads the conversation. At a table by the window with a drink each, Renoir begins and immediately declares that the technological progress of the arts have led and will lead to worsening art. Elucidating his argument, Renoir cites examples from Greek art to the biotapestry. He states that works such as these remain objects looked upon with reverence by the people of today, even though the people that made them worked exclusively with what are now deemed primitive materials. Painters worked with dyes that were far more limited. Sculptors used tools far less precise, and still made work we are enamored with. With this, Renoir claims that nothing throughout history of art indicates that the prowess of the technology has made the artistic process superior. In fact, our adherence towards technical perfection breeds decadence. At this point, Rivette attempts to respond to Renoir. He speaks of the progress that technology has offered everyone, including filmmakers. Yet he cannot help but be convinced by Renoir's arguments. Renoir replies that technical perfection can only lead to boredom, as it does not create, only reproduce nature. The ability to sophisticate the dyes and fabrics used.
So far, I agree with that. Technical perfection is boring. I've argued for it, and it's one of the reasons why I advocate for modern art. Modern art is something that fascists actually disavow. Fascists have fought against modern art for the longest time in support of more traditional art, the kind of art that he's showing. I don't think it's necessarily fascist. At least I don't think. Maybe it can be construed that way. So we'll look into it. But saying that technical perfection is boring, usually, at least in terms of art, a lot of fascists look for technical perfection. So let's continue. Yeah, entartete Kunst. And one of the ways to not go with that perfection in terms of replicating nature and doing it technically, like with technical perfection, is by doing modern art, by using it as a way of expression or by using it as a way to conceptualize ideas, right? Or to materialize some concepts.
Used from the biotapestry, so that absolute realism could be achieved, killed the art of tapestry. There was no longer any need for the medium, which evolved out of its adversity. Progress eradicated all adversity, and any artist that attempt to revive or recreate this form do so as artificial. This brought the...
To answer to that, I feel like you have to first ground what art is. That sounds super pretentious and sounds like it's not necessary, but it is. Depending on what you define as what art is, you'll see tapestry either as, and we've had that discussion 2 days ago, as art or artisanat. In French, there's this distinction. Artisanat is like more crafting, or crocheting a shirt is not art. It's artisanat. And the line, at least to me, is drawn in the artistic process of each, right? And what is an artistic process? It's the process through which you can conceptualize or you can define ideas through an image or through a work of art, right? So if you just make a shirt for the sake of making a shirt and it's not your artistic process, you just have fun with doing that, I'm not going to call that shirt a work of art, right? I'll call it artisanat, and it doesn't mean that it's less valuable or whatever. It just means that it doesn't have an artistic process. The tapestry, right, that he's showing might be art if there's an artistic process behind it. But if it's just to make a cool tapestry or to make a tapestry that illustrates a story without actually an artistic process, without ideas driving the production of that artwork, then to me it's artisanat. It's craftsmanship more than actual art with thought that goes behind it. Rivers of Melancholy says someone should weave a tapestry copy of Pollock. See, there can be a way in which that tapestry is art and one in which it isn't. If it's just a tapestry copy of Pollock, but it's just one to either be sold, there's no artistic, there's nothing being said through that tapestry copy of Pollock, then in that case, I would call it craftsmanship. However, if you're making a tapestry copy of Pollock and you have a goal in mind, right? An artistic process. You're either doing it to comment on Pollock's place in art history through, a traditional means, which is tapestry or whatever, or denote the gap between tapestry, which used to be an ancient form of art that's no longer relevant, and Pollock, who is, more modern. Then in that case, through that justification and through that process, those ideas, then these works become art. But without them, they're just crafting. And that's why I believe that if someone did this today, either as a copy or just for fun because it looks cool, but they don't have any artistic process or artistic, in French we call it démarche behind it, I would say it's cool craft, right? But I don't know if I would call it art. So our definitions of art need to be established. This is still art history because back then, art had a different definition than it does now. The definition of art has always evolved and changed. So we'll see where this goes.
There was no longer any need for the medium, which evolved out of its adversity. Progress eradicated all adversity, and any artist that attempt to revive or recreate this form do so as artificial. This brought the conversation to film. Sound and lenses and projection are developed for the sole purpose to progress closer to the real thing. Eventually, art moves from a reproduction of nature and is in direct competition with nature. Renoir concludes the conversation, stating to Rivette that intelligence makes us slaves of all that is ugly. The conversation resonates with Rivette for many years that follow. 7 years later, in May of 1968, civil unrest breaks out in Paris and riots rage for many weeks.
Also, there's the issue of equating art with beauty, which I don't adhere to. I think art can be extremely ugly. It can have no aesthetic or beauty factor. The aesthetics of an artwork can be completely ignored and still remain an artwork. I feel like very often the two can be conflated by people who have a more traditionalist perception of what art is.
Anti-capitalist and trade unions barricade the streets and graffiti slogans onto buildings. Rivette is in the city during this period. Witnessing the events firsthand sparks a fire within him that radical change must occur, and his mind is cast back to his conversation many years ago with Jean Renoir. These two moments become the catalyst for him to completely change his filmmaking philosophy. Having crafted a career of formalist filmmaking, he abandons it for a far more experimental approach. His films become less scripted and less reliant on definitive meanings. It seems as though during his conversation with Renoir, a quirk of the French language occurred. The words technique and technology can be interchangeably used. Rivette decided against the formalism of his work, as it wasn't technology that would make his work uglier, but technique. For where does the differential point emerge between technique and technology?
I agree with that as well. I think there's a difference between technique and technology. Basically, just being able to use new technology, but maybe not apply applied a specific technique with that technology, right? If your whole idea is that technology can make us create art that's closest to a representation of nature or be in competition with nature, well, your goal, your technique, or no, your goal will determine what your technique is, right? And the technology is going to be a tool to achieve that goal. But if your goal is not to recreate nature or to be in competition with nature, but it's to be experimental, find new ways of expressing yourself, or whatever the case may be, then the technique completely changes because your goal is different. And the technology is still going to be a tool to achieve that goal. You can make you can make art that mimics beauty with a paintbrush, but you can also be subversive with a paintbrush, right? Make art that doesn't necessarily mimic nature. But you can do that with a camera as well. You can take pictures to mimic nature, like landscape photography, which I find the most boring type of photography there is. But you can also take a picture to express certain ideas. You can shed light on a specific issue that to you feels like needs to be brought up, and you can do that through an artistic process and make those pictures amazing. Yeah, Rivers of Melancholy. That's a bit the whole idea of art versus craftsmanship, or art versus artisanat. Rivers of Melancholy says in Ukraine, this kind of thoughtless art, as in traditional clothing, pottery, embroidery, is generally referred to as decorative practical art. A very bureaucratic word, so it simultaneously makes it a subset of art, but also places it vaguely below fine art. I don't think it necessarily goes below fine art. I think we perceive it as below fine art. It just has different purposes, right? Decorative, practical art decorates. It's more practical. It's maybe more traditional. It has its place in a specific culture. But art has a different purpose, right? And then we can talk about if art needs purpose or whatever it is. But if art, its purpose is to generate thought and generate conversations, it's not necessarily the case for decorative practical art, as you say, or thoughtless art, which I would categorize as artisanat. Are selfish less boring than landscape? You mean selfies less boring than landscapes? Absolutely. Yeah. But you can have, somebody says, I like subversive practical art. And like I said, you can have examples of people using traditional techniques and works of art or modes of creating modes of art and using it subversively with an artistic process, which, to me makes it art for sure.
If technology is created to supplement technique, then the development of technologies will inevitably lead to greater accessibility to once inaccessible techniques. By abandoning his technique, Jacques Gravette was actively attempting to make his work more progressive by the radical approach he saw twice in Paris.
Also, I disagree that technology takes away from technique. If technology can take away some technique, it's that perhaps that technique didn't have much to offer in the first place. Let me explain a bit. Like, for example, film camera is a technique that still exists a lot in artistic milieus, right? Digital cameras, though they have plenty of advantages, didn't supplant film cameras in some fields. It did in some practical fields, right? It's much easier to have them on your phone than film cameras. So it did make the automatic cameras compared to manual cameras make it so that you might need less technique. But if you don't need that technique to make a work of art, or if you don't need to apply the technique through technology to apply your work of art, it doesn't lessen that work of art necessarily. Because no matter what, if you would make, for example, if you just like embroidery versus just printing on a shirt, right? If your artwork lies on the fact that it's a cool technique instead of actually being cool in itself, perhaps your artwork sucks and needs more thinking. Does that make sense? So unless embroidery is part of the process of making that artwork, then there's no reason to embroider it. It should have just as much value if it was printed. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. It's like printing was invented, so it's bad because it kills the technique of writing or of hand reproduction, right? Because I'm sure there's good things about hand reproduction, right? When monks used to write the Bible completely by hand. But the thing is, and there might have been an artistic quality to rewriting the Bible by hand. However, when you print it, you're not taking away from the original work of art, unless your work of art, which is writing the Bible by hand, includes the artistic process of writing it by hand. And in that case, printing doesn't take away from that artistic process because you can still do it. Yeah, you can make great art, great landscape photography art, right? But you need that artistic process, that démarche, and need to explain it and all that. Let's continue.
This leads us to the conclusion that the definition of progress remains in the eye of the person defining it. Japan, 1996. Video game company Capcom launches its franchise Resident Evil. It becomes one of the world's most successful and acclaimed video game series, coining a new genre, survival horror, focusing less on action set pieces and more on item management and puzzle solving. The game is lauded for its design. In order to accommodate the burgeoning 3D technology available at the time, fixed camera perspectives are used to heighten atmosphere, rather than a traditional third or first person perspective. Character movement uses what came to be known as tank controls, so that movement is consistent while complete freedom is given to the position of the camera. Multiple entries within the series continue over several years, and the series evolves its formula while retaining the design ethos of the original, peaking in 2006 with Resident Evil 4. The natural progression of making the games more action-based and thus changing the perspective of the camera while retaining its survival horror roots. The series becomes an exemplar of intentional game design, utilising the limitations of its hardware to its absolute potential. In 2019, Capcom decides to remake its main series entries. They had done this previously, remaking their original 1996 game in 2002, keeping the same mechanics but utilising pre-rendered backgrounds. The primary upgrade being in the department of aesthetics. The 2019 remake upgrade the visual look of the original games. They also implement a completely new design philosophy. Due to the limitations of the technology at the time, the original entries are deemed archaic and therefore irrelevant. The originals have not progressed, whereas technology has, so the original games can become better with technology. The remakes do not have the cinematic camera perspectives, opting for a more traditional industry standard point of view. The UI does not take place within the diegetic space of the game, instead opting for a more universal, inoffensive look utilised across all games, rather than one catered for each individual design. Tension was built with the player having to choose between moving or aiming a weapon. Now the player can do both actions at the same time, allowing for a lower difficulty curve to satisfy more casual approaches. The design philosophy from the past is now believed to have not been created with these choices in mind, rather that they were a product of their time, which is intrinsically worse and must be progressed.
I feel like the problem here is not that technology has evolved. The problem here is, at least in this case, if the games got worse or artistically worse, is that the problem maybe is capitalism. It's the incentive structure that makes game developers have to make videos that will appeal to the larger public. Graphics definitely do get a larger public. Though I do agree how limitations from some technology can force you to be creative, right? Same thing for budget limitations. There's, I've already mentioned In-Depth Cine, a YouTube channel, who does 3 budget movies, right? So Quentin Tarantino at 3 budgets. And you notice that when there's less budget for certain directors, very often the movies are more interesting because they have to play with some limitations, right? They have to be creative with the limitations that they have. So for video games, I can see it being the issue. When these limitations are taken away, or when the public expects more, or there's more money into play, then these developers, these filmmakers need to make a movie that will appeal to a larger public, and therefore they need better graphics, they need better cameras, they need better technology. But that's not the fault of technology. It's the fault of having to appeal to the broadest and the most, let's say, common denominator public.
The newer aesthetic choices prioritize photorealism and the inaccuracy of real life, much how Renoir perceived the avenue of cinema. Capcom operates and thus fuels an industry which is vitally reliant on technological progress. As such, their artistic approach must be altered. Nature operates with organic beauty, not one that is manufactured. In turn, though nature is beautiful, it's reliant on the subjectivity of an individual to craft a story of the world around them. Art, adversely, is manufactured, and thus the implementation of the principles of subjective nature into an objectively designed world means that the aesthetic principles of the latter fall to the wayside. Details and features of an image become overwhelming. A viewer's eye cannot be guided via light or composition, which is an objective element of design, as Capcom's primary focus is visual realism, a design choice not congruent with clear artistic direction. Visual and sometimes literal instructions are needed.
Also, just to add to that, it depends on which artistic, like, realism is not bad in itself. I said it's boring, but it depends. For example, if realism can allow you to, it can be a story, like a storytelling device, right? Perhaps Resident Evil 2, the graphics and the compositions of what you see isn't super compelling, but maybe the story is, maybe the writing is, maybe the relationships between the characters is compelling. I don't know. I've never played Resident Evil 2, and I doubt that these are compelling, right? But if they are, that could be where the art relies. It doesn't need to be absolutely everywhere, right? I don't know.
Needed in order for people to read its images.
Yeah, realism can make the game more immersive, or realism can make it so that the viewer's attention or the player's attention doesn't lie in the stylization of the game, but actually in its storytelling, or in its, I don't know, the character progress. And when I mean character progress, I don't mean them leveling up or whatever, or I mean, like, personal and emotional and maturity wise progress.
Whereas before hardware limitations required legibility through design becomes less visible, and thus further handholding is required. Because photorealism requires so much detail on the screen, Capcom chooses large splashes of colour to guide the player. Although this makes no sense from a diegetic perspective, it's necessary for the image to appear readable. Capcom continues along these design methods, as the aim for the medium of video games clearly demonstrates that this is the more desired option by companies and consumers alike. The remakes continue to be produced and become more critically and commercially acclaimed than their once groundbreaking predecessors.
Well, that's the thing, right? They're being loved and admired as products, as commercial products. They're not necessarily loved and admired for their art. They're loved and admired for their theme park kind of, vibe. Doesn't mean that like being a theme park and being art is not the same, like is incompatible with one another. But like companies, which are which are often the people who create our cultural products, are incentivized by creating commercially viable products. And as companies grow, they need to be more and more commercially viable. They need to get larger audiences. The reason why is because they need to keep growing perpetually. If they stagnate, that's not good. So they need to keep growing, keep getting more people. And at one point, making art or artistic video games might not be a very profitable industry. Maybe it is, but they make the decision to go maybe perhaps the more easy route and making commercially explosions games, that are not necessarily artistic. But the problem here is not technology. Maybe technology forces companies, technology creates a standard for these companies to create commercially viable products. It creates an expectation from an audience who don't give a fuck about art. But then again, this just means that this work is not art anymore. And you know what? That's fine. Other artists will make art. It just won't be Resident Evil 2. And same thing for movies, Yeah, like the Marvel movies aren't art. They're theme park rides and whatever. Sure, I agree. But there's still some great movies going out, like being released. Amazing movies being released that are art, unlike Marvel. Yeah, sure. Resident Evil 2 is not art anymore, but there's plenty of other games that are. And those other games are made with great technology. Those other movies are made with great technology.
This leads us to the conclusion that every technological change can be defined as progress.
I mean, it depends on how you define progress. It is technological progress, right?
Defined as progress.
Progress in a big sense also needs to be defined, of course. But you mean artistic progress? I don't know if any new technology means artistic progress. It does mean a widening of the modes of expression within art, which to me is a good thing.
The United Kingdom, post-World War II. Buildings are erected, signifying a new architectural philosophy. Brutalism removes mankind's previous notions of decoration and beauty and creates structures wherein the bare building materials are on show and the structure itself is the major design element. The edifices are perceived as the most pragmatic form of building structure, able to be implemented for tenement buildings, large-scale housing, and government facilities. By not focusing on ornamentation or non-ergonomic exterior elements, it excels in efficiency by expelling beauty. Its utilitarian design is inspired by and spurs on the pragmatic mood of the era. Historically, architecture's purpose was to evoke an emotion within people, to combine both the craftsmanship of erecting a structure with the innate reaction one has to an entity much larger than oneself. Brutalism as a movement looks at this as an archaic perspective, and one that's not relevant to a modern sensibility. Rather, everything that existed before needs to be reformed until it's no longer relevant. Much like how Resident Evil has to recreate its original invention until it replaces it entirely. The perspective of a brutalist building is temporal, with no concern for history.
Two things. First, there's a difference between architecture and video games. One is architecture, you can't really avoid it. Video games, you can. So, and it's not one that I say, oh, he missed it or whatever. But for example, Resident Evil 2, yeah, sure, you can make Resident Evil 2. I don't give a fuck if it's not art, if it's just a theme park. Yeah, sure, you can make as many Marvel movies as you want. I don't care. I just won't watch it. However, if you make a bunch of brutalist buildings, for example, that I can't just go, oh, I just won't look at them. I'll just close my eyes when I cross the street right in front of a brutalist building. Another thing, I mean, if you don't like brutalism, you don't like capitalism, but also Habitat 67 in Montreal. This is where I live. There's some really cool ways of being brutalist. Let me show you Habitat 67. This is it. This is inside. This is it. This is it. I think that's pretty fucking cool. Honestly, personally. Its original idea, the idea that the architect had for that work, they put it in Unreal Engine. Here.
Welcome to the future. You're looking at what's perhaps the most influential piece of architecture never built. Only a portion of Habitat 67 was ever completed. What stands in Montreal today is a brutalist icon that dramatically rethought the way we could live. What could have been is a sprawling megadevelopment that would have been home to thousands. Architectural visualization company Neoscape teamed up with Moshe Safdie to realize his vision in a stunningly detailed digital model powered by Unreal Engine.
Safdie is the one who designed this.
In the 1960s, Safdie asked, what if? Here, more than 50 years later, it's finally answered. Ambition admitted the design shock move.
When I gotta watch the whole thing, I just want to see. I'm going to talk about Unreal Engine. They're going to show
projects brought to digital life.
There was an immediate reaction.
This is considered brutalism, but it's fucking beautiful. It's really cool. And Rivers of Melancholy, who probably knows about it more than me, says also commie blocks shown in the video are not brutalist. It's functionalism. And I think, yeah, like I said, if you don't like brutalism or functionalism, blame capitalism. And if you're going to say commie blocks are not capitalist, they are. They are. State capitalism is still capitalism, baby. All right, we'll continue. But yeah, I feel like this I wouldn't necessarily defend this. I think brutalism still has its value, but this perhaps not, too much.
Brutalism holds reverence for material rather than presentation and aims for a form of architecture where people will actually avoid looking at the buildings. Without the decoration of Baroque or Gothic architecture, there is nothing outside of artificial geometry, making them alien to the environment and thus invisible. This way, people are encouraged to better their immediate environment and put more effort into themselves and the things they are able to control rather than the large-scale aspects that should be left to others. Brutalism continues to become such a low-cost, highly efficient form of architecture that it renders all other forms of architecture irrelevant. Brutalism achieves its goal and becomes the preeminent building structure around the world. As time passes, brutalism also becomes synonymous with derelict and abandoned monoliths. The public find the buildings ugly and thus treat them without care. Many buildings are destroyed due to this lack of care over time. The average lifespan of a building shortens. However, due to its low cost and modular construction, another can be erected in its place for the following generation. The public is ultimately unable to avoid its oppressive design, and the lack of beauty instigates a hatred for the buildings by those around them. Though the public do not understand that these buildings represent progress, the philosophical element for architects and those who understand the buildings from a more theoretical level urge their existence.
See, it's not necessarily progress. It's just a movement with different ideas that it conveys, right? It's like an art movement is not necessarily progress. It doesn't mean that it's going forward. It just means that, here's a different ideas that some artists are proposing, right? And some buildings here, I wouldn't mind. This one here, you can't see it. Let me disappear. This building there, I don't find it ugly. And again, what's Rivers of Melancholy really doesn't like the brutalism equals functionalist prefabs. Some can be really cool. It's just how you apply it, right? It's just how much of the market how much the market pressures, how much force do they have in creating a building?
Use the idea of beauty by reinforcing the idea that beauty is synonymous with the aesthetic of a belief system, the ideology being more important than the actual implementation. The intention is good, therefore the building is good. As long as that belief system is for the greater good, then everything is inherently beautiful. This leads us to the conclusion that beauty is purely ideological and ugliness is progress.
That's stupid. That's idiotic. Nobody's going to say ugliness equals progress. Very often ugliness creates conversations. Something that's not beautiful can create we ask ourselves, why did this person do this when it's ugly? And because of that, it creates more engagement perhaps than when something is beautiful. But beauty in itself, I don't know what he means by ideological, but I think when we see something beautiful, we stop our what we think there, right? When something is beautiful, I don't have to think, why did this artist do it? Aside from they did it because it's beautiful. When an artist makes something beautiful, I don't have to think, well, we said, why did he do it? I don't have to think, what is the artist trying to say behind this artwork? Because I can just stop at because it's beautiful. But when something is ugly, when an artist does something ugly, I have no choice but to think about it and engage with the artwork. Why did this artist do this? It's not because it's beautiful, so there must be a reason. Why did this artist do this? You know? And this question that you ask is the spark that makes you engage with an artwork. And that's what makes an artwork meaningful, at least to me. Let's go back to how he went to that conclusion, how he got to that conclusion.
In the actual implementation, the intention is good, therefore the building is good. As long as that belief system is for the greater good, then everything is inherently beautiful.
I don't believe that it's for the greater good. I think it's just one way to experience the world and manifest the world through an artwork. For example, the style of brutalism, but it doesn't mean that it's good. Like Duchamp's fountain, which is, I always come back to it. I don't think anybody would say it's good. It's for the greater good or whatever. It's just a way of engaging with the world and having people engage with the world. And I feel like Duchamp's urinal, and we're talking over 100 years after the fact that it's been made, so it did something important. Duchamp's urinal, at least to me, is more engaging and much more meaningful than any Monet, you know, in terms of a personal experience with the artwork. However, it doesn't make it better or for the greater good. Anarcho-Duchampism, again, going back with Duchamp.
This leads us to the conclusion that beauty is purely ideological and ugliness is progress.
I feel like beauty stops conversation. Not necessarily. You can have some beautiful, beautiful artworks that do make you think and that do make you engage with them. But very often also beauty is just there for beauty's sake, which I feel like is not.
New York, August 8th, 1949. Time magazine publishes an article on artist Jackson Pollock. The subline reads, "Is he the greatest living painter in the United States?" For the years preceding this article, Pollock had become a notable figure in the art world, revolutionizing and dismantling traditional Western technique. He forms his drip technique, which would typify his most famous paintings. Rather than using an easel, Pollock lays his canvas on the floor and splashes paint across its surface, dangling his paintbrush, flicking and cascading the pigment in all manner of ways one is expected not to. With an identity of his own, Pollock also merges into the art movement of the time of abstract expressionism. The artists within abstract expressionism value feeling and emotion over formal rules. Their inner world is more important than the outer. and the individual is more important than anything else. This sentiment leads into the 1960s. Andy Warhol spearheads the pop art movement as concept becomes more important than technique. Art fuses with mainstream culture and no longer demands the elevation of mankind, rather accepts
The elevation of mankind.
the base culture and elevates those images to the level of sacred icons.
Elevates base culture. No. You don't get what conceptual art is. Yeah. This is starting to get fashy though. Hold on, let's go back. With the fart noises on these guys. First, yeah, the individual is important. And I've said it before. I don't believe today. Just in general, abstract art doesn't really impact me because I don't give a fuck about the feelings and expression of people in the 1960s. It's just the importance of Pollock and abstract expressionists in general is their break with traditional art. It's their what their art means in its context. However, if someone did these artworks today, I wouldn't give a fuck about them. Because in the context, well, it's not engaging with any ideas. Here, there's ideas being created, right? Pollock is making the paint itself become a subject, which is a thought that no one really thought of before. And through the fact of challenging people into thinking that here there's no, it's not even shapes or lines that are the subject. The subject is the paint itself. You might think that you don't care, and that's fine if you don't care, but you have to accept that it's an idea that's kind of revolutionary, or at least it's a new idea that Pollock manifested. It had value because of that. Now, conceptual art, unless you don't understand what it is, and maybe he'll go through it, but conceptual art is not just about with pop art. Pop art often was criticized for criticizing lower art, and here you're saying it's not criticizing lower art, it's putting it on a pedestal. It's the case for some artists, but not all artists of pop art necessarily put them up on a pedestal. I'm thinking of Jasper Johns, who's known as as a pop artist with his. So Jasper Johns is known as a pop artist. He did, for example, flags, targets, or numbers. Where are the numbers? There's letters here. He did a lot of numbers as well. But his work, even though he's a pop artist, is not about the flag. I made a video on it. I made a video on Thief where I talk about Jasper Johns, so you can look it up. But he's a pop artist who's not elevating the flag to any level. Actually, he's just using it as an object. Oh, there's the numbers. Same for numbers. He's not saying numbers are art or numbers are great or whatever. He's just using them as a way to, well, it's his own artistic style. In a nutshell, his artistic style is to take everyday objects that we don't necessarily perceive as an object that has value because we see it every day, such as the flags, and use it with a different technique so that the technique and the object itself, like the painting isn't necessarily about, for example, a flag, because the flag we see it all the time, we kind of ignore the flag, but it's not about the technique either, because it's also about an icon. So his idea is to be between both, not about a subject, but it's not about paint like Pollock, because it can't be about paint because it actually has a subject. But anyway, that's just an example.
This sentiment leads into the 1960s. Andy Warhol spearheads the pop art movement as concept becomes more important than technique.
Concept had become more important than technique for a while, at least for many people. I mentioned Duchamp. Duchamp's Renoir was in 1917, I believe. And he showed that concept could be more important, at least in the case of his own artwork, more important than technique. And it's one that I agree with wholeheartedly. I don't give a fuck about technique. To me, art is about concepts, about having people engage with concepts. It's about creating conversations with these concepts. Very often, this person, I imagine, when they talk about the movies that they review, they don't talk about the techniques of the movie. Maybe they do. I don't remember exactly. They're not going to talk about the composition or the colors or the cuts, which is technique, but they'll talk about the story. They'll talk about the concepts evoked in that story, talk about the relationships between people. To me, that's more important than the technique. And that's what makes a movie great, right? It's, at least to me, again, it's the concepts that are evoked, right? It can be, the concept of family, brotherhood. It can be grief. It can be love, whatever. And it's the exploration of these concepts through different angles, different characters, different situations, different contexts that make it so that we engage with it. We don't engage with an artwork necessarily because it has great composition or great colors. Because just having great colors or great composition, sure, it helps. It can help in the storytelling, but it only helps insofar as it conveys a concept. And perhaps the most intellectual of us, the most refined, will say, the only thing I care about is the concept. The technicality, it can be filmed on a phone. You can film a movie on a phone, but if it has great concepts and a great story and great character relations and great character progress and character arcs, I will enjoy that movie thoroughly. And I might even cry watching that movie. The technique can help, right? You can add some music that will make you sad. You can have use cuts in a different way that will evoke emotions. That's all great, but at least to me, it's the concept that matters. That's what I find interesting.
Fuses with mainstream culture and no longer demands the elevation of mankind, rather accepts the base culture and elevates those images to the level of sacred icons.
No, not necessarily. The concept here, like for example, with the repetition of the Marilyn Monroe icon, its value, I believe, is that it makes us, and a lot of pop art was that, it's to think of how we're surrounded by a lot of art, or at least illustrations, and how we don't perceive them as art because of the context in which they are. So you take a comic strip by Roy Lichtenstein, by someone who writes comic strips. You take that and you're like, you don't perceive it as art because it's just a comic strip. Then Roy Lichtenstein, an actual established artist, will blow it up, put it in a museum wall, and then you'll look for its details. You look at what it means, blah blah blah. And this recontextualization, at least to me, has value, right? It doesn't mean that it's lifting the comic strip to this level of sacred icons. Not at all. We're talking about engaging with this image in a different context than what we're used to, and thinking about what does that mean about how I perceive the world around me? What does that mean about how primed I am to look at an image in a gallery versus how primed I am when I look at the image in a comic book? These questions are important. These questions are reveal a lot about ourselves and the way we depict the way we perceive our world in the context and in how we're primed into looking at different things. I think that has a lot of value. If some people are going to say, oh, I love Marilyn Monroe or the image of Marilyn Monroe because Warhol reproduced it, you didn't get the point. Like, you missed the point, and like, I'm sorry that you had to, that you missed the point. But the point is, it's about challenging the way you interact with the world.
The most successful art in the world no longer has to even be made. Rather than changing one's own art to resonate, it makes more sense to simply change the rest of the world. New York again, 1980s. Jeff Koons establishes a factory wherein he hires assistants to work on individual aspects of his art. Inspired by Andy Warhol and evidently the success of Fordism, Koons establishes an assembly line model in which each worker is responsible for a small section of his work and nothing else. Koons describes this as a paint-by-numbers approach. Koons becomes an artist that doesn't even have to touch his work. The art is a product, completely surface level and astoundingly egotistical. His work.
I'm okay with doing art that you don't have to touch. Duchamp, did he touch the urinal? He might have signed it, but he could have had someone else sign it. But it's the concept that matters. There was an artwork downstairs during the exhibition I organized, and I will have a segment about it on Germinal. And one of these artworks was created by my friend who had the idea. I just put it on paper, right? I manifested that idea. But who is most important in the creation of this artwork? The person who had the idea, or the person who wrote the word on the painting that he wanted to do? To me, it's the person who had the idea. I credited that artwork to him. I just followed the recipe that he gave me to make his artwork. I'm not an artist. I didn't have to think. I just wrote what he told me to. It's the whole idea is an artist a crafter? Or is it is he like a thinker? Or someone who is tuned with the world to make them think? I see it as an extremely community focused experience, right? It's having other people think about either a concept or an idea or an experience that you're conveying. I see it completely opposite of being egotistical.
Is a product, completely surface level and astoundingly egotistical. His work becomes some of the highest selling artworks by any living artist.
Also, like, I've never really checked into Jeff Koons. Honestly, personally, I don't mind. Like, that's why my answer was that I don't mind if he doesn't touch it. Also, I don't give a fuck if someone makes a lot of money from art. In the sense, I don't give a fuck in the sense that if they make a lot of money off their art, doesn't mean that their art is necessarily important or that necessarily means more. It might be more influential culturally because we attribute a lot culturally to things that have no monetary value. But yeah, that's
Money
it.
rules the art world, and now the artist no longer needs to have technique, for he does not even need to touch his work.
Yeah, that's okay. No need to have technique, no need to touch his work. That means the artist is now a thinker, is now a philosopher instead of a craftsman. Or he can be both. But I'd prefer someone who is thinking conceptually over some who solely thinks conceptually and creates things conceptually than someone who solely applies it technically. I don't think someone who solely applies technique without thought can be an artist, but I think someone who solely apply concepts without technique can be an artist. And what else did he say?
The artist no longer needs
Oh yeah, money rules the art world. That's a capitalism problem, baby.
to have technique, for he does not even need to touch his work.
Also, you have to define what the art world is. Of course, if you mean the art world is the world where art is the most expensive, of course money is gonna be, ruling it by definition. But it depends how you see art as well. If art is more communally determined, as I believe it is, because that's where you can have the most engagement and the most conversations, is when you have art communally. That's why I started an exhibition in my living room. I made a video about that. I already plugged it. But I think that's the art world that matters the most. The art world with big money and all that might be the most influential because it's ruled by money and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think it's the one that matters. It matters the most financially, which under capitalism, it's the one that matters the most. But in terms of its impact, I don't believe it's the one that matters the most. Quickly, very, very quickly, because I've talked about it with the singer that I've had who gave a show downstairs again. I talk about it in my video. But that singer, who's a local singer from Quebec, right? Quebec is an 8 million large province. He has more influence in Quebec than I do, even though I have more viewers, more subscribers, more influence, at least on the internet, than him. But because his influence is so is so focused or is so concentrated on one territory, he has a bigger impact on everyone, while my impact on people is more diffuse or diffused. I have a worldwide audience, but it's a couple of individuals all over the world. He has a province-wide audience, but he influences communities through his shows, through his, interactions with his music on the radio, in shows and stuff like that. And that had me thinking. Of course it had me thinking. And for example, here, I've talked about YesBZ a while, and I have an artist, she's right there, she's working right now in her studio. We made the joke that more people in YesBZ in my region know the artist that's working right now in the studio than there's people in YesBZ who know Ai Weiwei or who know Jeff Koons. So that puts you in perspective. What is the art world, right? We know what the art world is in terms of capitalism, money, and all that. However, what does it mean when in a region an artist is more popular than Jeff Koons? And keep that in mind. If you go from place to place, which artist do you know most? A contemporary artist. Many people will name a local artist before Jeff Koons, because Jeff Koons' influence or notoriety is diffused all over the world and is known by just like some rich people often, or people who know a bit about him. A lot of people will say, "Oh, yeah, an artist. Oh yeah, I there's an artist in my town who's who did an exhibition in my local gallery. I went to go see it." Or they might, even if they don't name them first, it will be the artist that they've engaged with the most. Most people haven't engaged with Jeff Koons.
1990s, Damien Hirst emerges and demonstrates that not only does the artist not need technique, he doesn't even need the idea. Hirst takes the ideas from many other lesser-known artists and becomes the richest artist in the world. Technique and concept are removed in favor of spectacle.
Here you're saying that there's no idea, but I disagree completely.
Even need to touch his work. 1990s, Damien Hirst emerges and demonstrates that not only does the artist not need technique, he doesn't even need the idea. Hirst takes the ideas from many other lesser-known artists and becomes the richest artist in the world.
Perhaps. I've never really looked into Damien Hirst, and I've made a whole video on thievery and art and all that. But there, you might disagree with this. He might have stolen the concept, but through his theft, he's created another concept, which is theft. Or what does it mean to steal concepts, right? If he plagiarized and made money off of it, then he's a thief, I guess. But that creates a whole other concept to play with. And yeah, maybe that concept fucking sucks, right? Because he stole it from other people, and oh, I wish he hadn't done that. But that makes people engage with his artworks. It makes them think about the value of these artworks, the value of originals, the value of plagiarism, the value of reproduction. It makes them think about that. What is your landscape painting that takes hours to create with the most masterful technique? What does it make people think about? Nothing. They go in front of your landscape painting, they go, wow, that's beautiful at best. That's if they don't just ignore it. So the best is they'll look at it and they'll be like, wow, that's beautiful. Period. And that to me is an artwork that failed. It's an artwork that doesn't serve its purpose. That's not engaging. That's not, doing anything with the potential that art can have. Damien Hirst does better than that. Despite having concepts, despite having technique. He does have concepts, as I've illustrated. Anyway. Dude, have you seen Damien Hirst's house? That guy's just in it for the money. If he's just in it for the money, but still made us think, made us engage, he did it. Do I believe artists should be fucking rich? No, not at all. I don't believe that. However, despite if he's in it for the money or whatever, he's made us think through that and made us engage, made us have conversations. The fact that this guy is presenting it, the fact that I'm responding to it, means that this painting has much more to say than most things.
Technique and concept are removed in favour of spectacle. Hearst creates NFTs of dots for people to purchase, collectively valued at $25 million. Technique and concept are removed in favour of spectacle. Hearst creates NFTs of dots for people to purchase, collectively valued at $25 million. 2019, 2 years previous to this, artist Beeple sells his NFT art for over $60 million. Beeple himself confused as to why the artwork was sold for that much. The art is bought by a man interested in the investment of NFTs as a financial incentive.
Yeah, that is Cinema Cartography. Lit was 28. Yeah. NFTs. I don't think it means much for art. Personally, it means as much for art as poster reproductions or postcard reproductions that are sold for 60,000. Personally, I don't think those postcard reproductions that are sold for 60,000 are worth mentioning. I don't give much work.
People just happens to be in the right place at the right time. Art is completely commodified. Such commodification allows multiple companies to incorporate AI art within their process for cost efficiency. Just as brutalist buildings are erected, as with enough time, there lies no other alternative. Alternative manners of living appear in the distant past, as we rapidly progress without consideration.
Wrong. That I disagree with wholeheartedly.
Manners of living appear in the distant past, there lies nancy. Just as brutalist buildings are erected, as with enough time, there lies no other alternative.
There's no other alternative to Marvel Studios? I disagree with that wholeheartedly. And Cinema Cartography knows that. Cinema Cartography has to know that. If they watch movies that are not just in the past, but like current movies, and that are just not just Marvel Studio movies. As I've already said, I was on the selection committee for a film festival. And those movies all came out last year. And they were beautiful. Not all of them. Some of them were trash. But many of them were incredible. Some of them made me cry. Some of them were amazing with very low budgets. And the whole idea that there is no alternative if Marvel... No, that's not true. You might be talking for the broader public, but that baby is a capitalism thing. Same thing for art. You have people who can recreate the Mona Lisa, or who can do a pretty damn good job at it, right? There's people who can do amazing paintings, murals. It's just that we don't give them much credence because it's fucking boring. Make the Mona Lisa today. I don't give a fuck. Some people do extremely realistic paintings, realistic drawings, either with paintbrushes or pens or pencils, and that's not going anywhere. But we're not going to elevate them to the status of great artist because they're just technicians.
This brings us to the conclusion that progress will inevitably lead to the destruction of all technique and nothing will exist anymore.
Nothing will exist anymore. I think it doesn't destroy technique. It makes it optional. So if someone still wants to use technique, they can, and they still do, right? It's not gone. People still draw, people still paint photorealistically. People still make movies with film. Of course, it's not as prevalent, but perhaps it's because they're realizing that the film doesn't add much, like the film videography, doesn't add much to the movies, at least in people's interpretation of it. And if someone's like, oh yeah, film videography is for me, and I can't watch anything but that, there's still a lot of people who make film videography. And it'll be less and less. I agree with that. But I don't think it will be destroyed. I think it will always remain. The same way, there's still people today who do embroidery, they still do pottery, even though perhaps we don't No, we still use pots, even though, yeah, they still do pottery, even though like we have like plastic pots all the time. Is it pots or like containers? Yeah, progress makes something obsolete, maybe. Yeah, somebody. Is obsolete and optional the same thing? Sean, to steelman the argument, would you say that it could make the techniques obsolete? Yeah. Well, yeah. It makes the technique maybe obsolete, but if someone sees that in the technique there's value, then they can still do it. For example, knitting is obsolete. You can buy stuff online. You can buy stuff at any store, to keep your head warm or to keep your hands warm, whatever. But people still knit. I don't think so. I don't think it destroys. I just think it makes it more obsolete. I think it's a good way to put it. But it's still there for people to do and enjoy if they want to. But perhaps the technique, we're noticing that it's not that important in the creation of an artwork. That's what we've been noticing for the past couple of 100 years. Yeah, people still draw and paint photorealistically after photography was invented.
The present day. You walk inside a historical building. You could be anywhere in the world. The building may be engraved in your culture. You may be in some other foreign land. It doesn't matter. You stand in awe at the spectacle of all that remains around you. Time flows differently in these walls. Walls built by a humble mason echo the songs of those that came before you. You look over your shoulder, and you swear you hear the voices of all the ancestors that came before you. You turn around. You hear their laughter and their joy, and all the thoughts that they expressed, as though they were your own. Inside these walls, you're a part of history and nature all at once. You're one person that makes no difference, and all the difference in the world.
I'll give an argument. I don't know if, I doubt if Cinema Cartography is going to watch this, but like everything that he's saying, you could say about the Stonehenge, which isn't in its aesthetic completely like extremely beautiful, right? You could say that about, perhaps the ruins of a Colosseum that doesn't stand anymore, right? You can say, oh, it makes me think of the Mason, it makes me think of the forefathers, blah, 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 without actually experiencing the aesthetics of the place. Because what he's experiencing here is not necessarily aesthetics, as he seems to be defending, but what he's experiencing is a sense of historicity of history. And the value in these pieces is not that they're necessarily beautiful, it's because they're historical. And if you go back to things where things are not necessarily beautiful in its aesthetics, but it's beautiful in its a history, then maybe you can see that you're not admiring the beauty of it, you're admiring the history of it. For example, the cave paintings, you can be there and be, wow, this is really in touch with my humanity and my forefathers. And what does he say? Like, listen to all of this and think of Stonehenge or the Lascaux cave paintings that are not necessarily aesthetically beautiful, but that could relay everything that he's about to say.
Some other foreign land. It doesn't matter. You stand in awe at the spectacle of all that remains around you. Time flows differently in these walls. Walls built by a humble mason echo the songs of those that came before you. You look over your shoulder, and you swear you hear the voices of all the ancestors that came before you. You turn around. You hear their laughter and their joy, and all the thoughts that they expressed, as though they were your own. Inside these walls, you're a part of history and nature all at once. You're one person that makes no difference, and all the difference in the world. You're alive, and you're living. You gaze into the icons, painted by those primitive people, whose humanity gazes directly into and through your soul.
Again, that's the Lascaux cave paintings. And I would feel the Lascaux cave paintings more than I would the Vatican, the whole Vatican, not just the Sistine Chapel or whatever. I'm talking the whole Vatican. But you know what I mean? I would feel these sentiments would be felt more through. And so here, it's not a matter of technique. And I think that's what his argument is that it's not about technique, because here, these people didn't have much technology. They had technique, but they didn't have much technology. But the thing is, perhaps it's not about technique, the what makes us love these places or admire these places is not the technique or the technology. It's relationship to history. And a relationship to history doesn't really have to do anything with progress, with technology, or with technique. It has to do with our own experience, with ourselves, with our mortality, with the mortality of the people who came before us. And again, that can be felt in the Stonehenge. It can be felt in it can be felt at the Lascaux caves. It can be felt even without art. It can be felt when you're like on the beach of Normandy. All right, everybody, close your eyes. Think that you're in the beach of Normandy.
Over your shoulder, and you swear you hear the voices of all the ancestors that came before you. You turn around. You hear their laughter and their joy, and all the thoughts that they expressed, as though they were your own. Inside these walls, you're a part of history and nature all at once. You're one person that makes no difference, and all the difference in the world.
Like, you can be on the beaches of Normandy, you can be fucking anywhere. You can be in the parliament where, it doesn't have to do with, again, with the aesthetics of the place. It has to do with its history.
You're alive and you're living. You gaze into the icons painted by those primitive people, whose humanity gazes directly into and through your soul. You're elevated to something greater than you ever imagined. For a brief moment, you are every human being that ever lived. You're the builder that constructed this building, the painter that adorned it, the poet that filled it with song, the simple man that was humbled in its presence. And you are in the presence of everything. You leave the building and go outside. Where is the builder? Where is the poet? They've been replaced. They've created something else. They've created new things that they're subservient to. You see a coffee shop.
This idealization of history is infuriating. All right, here's the past where there's beautiful architecture with the laughter of our ancestors and their great experiences and their great happiness and their great achievements. Meanwhile, in like the actual world, there's consumerism and people going up escalators, and I'm really angry about it. Like, you could show the greatest things about today versus the worst things about back then. You'll have peasants dying of the plague, kids plopped out of their mother's belly completely blue because they died. Mothers not even crying or weeping at their dead son because, well, it's just another dead baby. This glorification of the past, I think that's one of the maybe proto-fascist tendencies that Rocket Supreme underlined or maybe saw as problematic. I keep being recommended by Facebook the Trad West page because I keep looking at the comments and they're like, oh, Mr. Canvas must love Trad West if they keep looking at the comments. I don't love Trad West, but I keep looking at the comments. And it's always this glorification of a past, of only the great parts of the past where they've elevated great cathedrals, but they never show the peasants who had to, who paid their taxes, died paying their taxes on the soil, who died, building these things, who lost arms, lost legs, the great pains that went through, erecting these monuments, the great pains that went into concentrating enough wealth to erect these monuments. Meanwhile, in modern society, they have escalators.
They've created something else. They've created new things that they're subservient to. You see a coffee shop, a place of purchases. The simple man is now a salesman. You look over your shoulder. There are people everywhere, but the human being is nowhere to be seen. You get ready.
I'm not even going to comment on that. I hope people find that funny on themselves.
There are people everywhere, but the human being is nowhere to be seen. You get ready. For you are the modern man. History extends 40 years back and no further. You could be anywhere in the world. The buildings are erected through a blueprint of absolute functionality. No one feels anything. This is progress. The progress sweeps up the streets like an ocean, and you swim in it trying to keep yourself afloat. Your immediate past sinks beneath you, sinking to the bottom like everything else that came before. It's too late to build on top of it. Everything must start anew. New icons, new ideas, new things. You look around on this new aquatic land. Everything is so much better. It's perfect. There's no more doubt. We're cleansed of our mistakes. We're greater than we've ever been. You experience the new ascension of humanity. You experience no adversity.
Krenna says the simple man was a salesman then too. No, he wasn't a salesman. He was very often a peasant who didn't know how to read, who didn't know how to write. Miserable conditions, far from being emancipated individuals. Very simple, but perhaps let's not advocate for a majority of the people to go back to being illiterate peasants. Probably not the best time in the world to advocate for.
You pity those poor primitives that came before you. How insignificant they would be in your presence. The modern man, he who has bypassed technique. People used to waste their lives, sculpting for hours at a time to create something imperfect. Now whatever you can imagine will be manifested through concept alone. You, who can 3D print anything greater than the most renowned artisan that came before you. You have ascended through progress. You who can bypass all human ingenuity that comes with creation. You're a genius without even trying.
Without even trying, developing concepts and engaging with them and communicating with them, I feel like it takes a lot of work. And yes, sculpting for 7 hours may take a lot of work as well. But personally, I feel like, creating a concept, discussing it, creating a way in which people can engage with that concept is more rewarding and more influential to the people around you than creating a sculpture that people will look at, say, impressive, and walk away. I feel like here, one of the tenets of fascism is also anti-intellectualism, right? It's all about being in the action before thought, action before ideas. Act, don't think. The diabolization of intellectuals, of people who spend too much time thinking about ideas. And I feel like here, this whole idea of there's more value in spending 7 hours sculpting than there is in understanding a concept and understanding it well enough to communicate it, to have other people engage with that concept and maybe provoking them, in their images or in their perception of that concept. And maybe they can provoke you and you can grow from that. I'm not saying you can't grow from doing 8 hours of sculpture, but I do believe that there's more potential in growth when you engage with concepts and when you debate concepts and when you're able to either come to a common agreement or understand the other perspective through these conversations.
And you float on a new world. There are no rules for you. Everything is how you will choose it to be. By your own will, things will be so. And the water's rising, and for now, you float. You look down to the depths beneath you, and you see nothing. Eventually, you too are history. You too, old and forgotten, like all buried beneath the waves that you chose to float upon. And you too will die. You progress, but the water keeps rising. You need to start again. You start over and over and over. Where did that building go? Where are those people that were with you? They lie beneath. You close your eyes and sink deeper, swallowed by the unstoppable ocean. In the silence, you try and remember what came before. And somewhere, even in this ocean, they appear. You're an Egyptian scholar, watching Alexandria burn. You're a tribesman, stood on the shore as the ship sailed towards you. You're the astronomer, burned at the stake. You're eventually replaced, dinosaur that you are. so tied to your time, can't keep up with the rate of progress. You miss your technique, you miss your earth, the possibilities that were once around you. You never came to terms with progress. Technique is for the ancients, beauty is subjective, technology your only truth, and all progress is good. Why stop? Keep going. Just let it be, and sink. Don't interfere, and you might not even notice that the world that came before is gone.
All right, what do we think of this? I don't think it's fascist. Rocket Supreme said proto-fascist? Perhaps. I think he would have gained in defining what progress is. But yeah, it had something a bit fashy to it. Yeah, I don't think it's fashy. I think maybe a little. I think this is a very cynical way of looking at art. You can look at great movies that have been made in the past few years and see how the idea that is expounded here, does it really hold ground? I feel if anything, there's been greater movies to have reached greater audience, especially through the internet, in the past few years. I don't think it's fascist. I think it has fascistic tendencies. I don't think cinema cartography is necessarily fascist. Maybe they are. But from what I get, it's just someone who's maybe who's been exposed to art that they don't like, who's been exposed to art that they feel like is easy or that they don't understand, and because of that, they think that progress is the reason for why they don't like it or don't understand it or feel like, or they have a vision of art. There's another possibility, a vision of art that is based on technique, which seems to be the case, and on beauty and on the aesthetic experience of the viewer, which is not necessarily popular nowadays. It's popular with a lot of people, but let's say not with people who know about art or who are interested in art, right? Well, a lot of conservatives will prefer the art that looks beautiful. I think most people will agree that, they don't make art like they used to. Oh, modern art sucks. Right? And if you don't like modern art, there's plenty of art out there that's not for you. That is for you. There's also plenty of art that's out there that's not for you. But there's plenty of art out there that's for you. Same thing for movies. If you don't like Marvel movies, check out Criterion. I watched a movie not long ago called 8 Mountains. It was beautiful. I loved it. It made me cry. It made me think. It made me discuss the movie with my partner that I watched the movie with. One of the best movies I've watched in a long time. And it was a movie made in 2022. It was probably made with a great camera, with great technology and all that. Yet, it was amazing. So, I know there's so much art out there. There's too much art out there to believe that it's getting erased, that art is being destroyed or whatever. A lot of the problems with modernity, it's that we're not looking enough at the past. A lot of our issues is that we just changed too much. A lot of the issues of today is that we changed too much and that we aren't going back to how things used to be. If we could go back to the way things used to be, things would be much better. I think maybe that's why it's a bit conservative. I think you can look at this. You can look at this topic. If you were to criticize capitalism, at least to me, you want to talk about how a lot of art has become functionalist, right? A lot of in terms of at least in terms of architecture, it's become functionalist, and a lot of art is now made to appeal to the greater audience to make the most amount of money. I feel like there you would be pointing at a better reason as to why art is different and to you is less good or less meaningful. Yet, what you're doing, instead of pointing at, systemic reasons that can be calculable, you seem to be gesturing vaguely at a past that you're glorifying and that you characterize as being, the pinnacle of humanity. Meanwhile, you're not acknowledging the fact that people weren't happy during the Middle Ages. Andrei Rublev, oh yeah, that's amazing movie, right? But the peasants during Andrei Rublev's time, it wasn't a great time. And I think when you've watched the movie Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky, I know you have. You've made videos about it and you've shown it here. You don't want to be a peasant in Andrei Rublev's time. They murder a whole village at one point. You don't want that. It's not a more meaningful time. If we went back to the times of Andrei Rublev, we might have some cool paintings, in the cool style of the Middle Ages. We might have really beautiful bells, that sound really good. But if you were able to make videos, you would say, God damn, we're degenerates here. So yeah, I glorifying the past is, and advocating for it and criticizing modernity vaguely without actually pinpointing an actual systemic reason as to why reality or why modern society sucks feels fashy. What do you guys think? I've completely ignored chat this whole time. Interesting video. Thank you, Rocket Supreme, for sharing it. Do I think it means that the cinema cartography is a fascist? No. Maybe if I watched other videos and it concorded. Does it, let's say there's like a scales, is this content creator fascist or not? Does it give a bit of weight to the fascist? Sure, but it doesn't mean that he is a fascist. Of course, if he talks about, how Western art has become degenerate, then it will confirm, or if there's other things that confirm the hypothesis, then maybe. But I don't think this is enough to call him a fascist. I'm sure there's fascist points in it, or pro-fascist, as you said, at the very least, conservative. I hope I made my case clear, but I don't think we ought to characterize cartography as a fascist or pro-fascist. But yeah, that was good. Thank you, Rocket Supreme and Cinema Cartography, for sharing your ideas, even though I disagree with them. You still make good videos. I still like your videos. I'm excited to see your next future videos and see if there's more of that kind of idea.